I know there's been a lot of hype recently around the 17 to 28mm f2.8 from Tamron and also their upcoming 70 to 180 f2.8 lens. But since I haven't tested either of those, I figured I'd give a review of a lens that I have had plenty of time with, and that is the Tamron 28 to 75 f2.8. Here are some of my favorite pictures I've taken with this lens. I'm going to be recording this whole video at 35mm on the Tamron at f2.8, just so you can see how video quality looks. I've been using this lens for over a year now, basically since it came out, so I have had plenty of time to get myself used to it, how it works, how it performs, the image quality, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that you update the firmware on this Tamron lens so that you can get the best performance out of it. The first thing I want to bring up about this lens is that it was $800 new when it first came out. Now if you go onto like Amazon or B&H, it's $880, which is kind of odd. You don't really see lens manufacturers do that too often. Usually the price goes down over time. If you compare this to the other fast zoom on the Sony full frame system, that's the GM 24 to 70mm f2.8, that lens is $1,400 more expensive than this Tamron lens. Sure, the GM has a stronger build quality, less chromatic aberration, it's got slightly better image quality. I wouldn't really know because I haven't tested. It's got a programmable button, an AF, a manual switch. So it's got all that going for it, but I just can't justify spending that kind of money on a single lens. I think a much more fair comparison is to compare it to the Zeiss 24 to 70mm, and that's an f4 lens. I'd say that's a more fair comparison just because they're in the pretty similar price range. Sure, this one's slower, it doesn't have as fast of an aperture, but I think it's a lot closer of a comparison than most people would think. Both the Tamron, which is on the camera right now, and the Zeiss have about the same image quality in my comparisons. I've used both lenses for at least a year. The plus sides to the Zeiss being that it goes a little wider, 24mm compared to the 28 on there, and it's got a much sturdier construction. It's a more solid lens, slightly more compact, and I think the image stabilization built into the lens is such a nice feature that the Zeiss has and the Tamron is missing. Anyway, back to the Tamron. It's got 9-bladed aperture, 67mm filter threading on the front, and weighs about 1 pound 3 ounces. The Zeiss is like about 15 ounces, so there's a little bit of a difference there. The RXD in the title of the lens stands for Rapid Extra Silent Stepping Drive. You won't hear any loud grinding of the motors to acquire focus. Focusing is fast, it's accurate, and for my uses, I've hardly ever had it hunt for focus unless I was doing some really low light shots. No stabilization built into this lens, which I'm assuming is to keep the size and cost down. Talking about keeping the size down, Tamron went with 28mm on the wide end instead of the usual 24. I think that if they were going for the 2.8 at a 24, it would be a larger lens, kind of like Sony's option. But the trade-off with that being you get 75mm on the telephoto lens rather than the 70. Now, I don't find that very useful. I would rather have a 24 to 70 than a 28 to 75 because you can always crop in and get a tighter image if you're wanting that, especially with these high-resolution cameras. But you can't go wider. You just can't make an image wider. The minimum focusing distance on this lens on the wide angle at 28, it's about 8 inches, and when you zoom all the way into 75, minimum focusing distance is about 15 inches. The build quality on the Tamron is middle of the road. It's a mostly plastic construction, though it does have some moisture protection, so you can take it out in some light drizzles and stuff like that, but I wouldn't be taking it out in any heavy rain. The focusing ring feels not precise, and the zoom ring feels not as smooth as the Zeiss lenses. Over the course of the year using this lens, I've noticed that a couple small pieces of dust have managed to make their way inside of the lens. Mainly in the back elements, there's a piece of dust that shows up in almost every picture I take, and I have to then import them into Lightroom and take out that spot. It's not a very big deal, but it's just annoying that it's there. If you have a really trained eye, you might notice some chromatic aberration with this lens. Usually I don't see that stuff, it's not too obvious, but I did notice it when I was at a King Tut exhibit down in Orange County, California. There was a lot of dark, and then colors, and then around the edges you could just see it. Didn't look too great. When shooting on the wide end, I was noticing some distortion. Mainly when I was doing my Bellingham Blue project, I would shoot wide on a building fairly close to it, and I would notice some distortion on the lines of the buildings. And that's also something that can be fixed in Lightroom. By no means is this a wildlife lens, but in a pinch, if you're trying to capture a shot at 75mm and then plus cropping in a little bit, you can get some pretty decent shots for online use. Take a look here at this hummingbird. You can see even a water drop on its head. Now for the bokeh, you can see here in the back on the Christmas tree lights how smooth and round this is. Here's a shot towards the sun. You can see how a backlit situation performs. Video quality with this lens is pretty darn good. I like having the fast aperture, makes videos look a little more cinematic and better. I wish it did have in-lens stabilization so you could do more handheld stuff or put it on a gimbal and it just even looks a little more smooth, but it's mostly tripod shots for me with this lens. My brother and I were actually using this lens quite a bit to do photo scanning, and we would make 3D models out of those photo scans. It worked pretty well in studio and outdoors when we tested it. Since this is an E-mount lens, you can put it onto your A6000 series cameras, but since those are crop sensors, it's going to behave more like a 42mm to 115mm. So if I'm trying to decide on a one all-around lens for my Sony system, it's a tough decision between the Tamron and the Zeiss. I know a lot of people hate on this Zeiss online. They think it has terrible image quality, but I've loved the results I've gotten out of it. It's a little more compact. It works at a wider focal length, but this Tamron, it's got a faster aperture, and that can be really nice with portraits or low light conditions that you might stumble into. So there you go, that's my video on the Tamron 28-75mm f2.8 lens. If you want to see more of the pictures I showed in this video, they're on my website or Instagram, and I'll see you next time.